joining us tonight for our second in our series of monthly webinars. This month, we're exploring feeding birds. For those of you who haven't joined us for a webinar before, I want to take a quick moment to introduce you to our platform, Zoom. So when I went full screen and shared my screen, it probably took over and went full screen for you too. So I highly recommend that you exit full screen, which you'll see the option up top. And then once you've done that, look for the chat window and open that up. And that will allow you to dock the chat window to the side so you can see both my screen and the chat window. And we're going to be having lots of opportunities to have discussions. So I would love for you to participate in those. So you're looking for this speech bubble icon that says chat. And then over here, please make sure you switch to all panelists and attendees. This will make it so that you can have conversations with each other as well as reach Lindsay and myself with questions. So I'm coming to you live tonight from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. We are a nonprofit membership-driven organization where our mission is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. And my name is Kelly Schaefer. I'm the education specialist with the K-12 education team here at the lab. And I'm joined today by my partner in crime, Lindsay Glassner, our outreach coordinator. She is in the chat window fielding all of your questions. She'll flag me down if I miss any as we go through the night. She's also going to be sharing a lot of really useful links for you. So as Lindsay's saying in the chat window, this webinar is recording, so don't worry about scrambling to get notes. A recording either from tonight or Tuesday will be made available to you on our YouTube channel. And in the description of the YouTube channel will be all of the links that I mentioned, so you'll have access to those later as well. And our mission here with the K-12 education team is to create innovative resources and training that build science skills while inspiring young people to connect to local habitats, explore biodiversity, and engage in citizen science projects. And the K-12 team does this in a number of different ways. We kind of have a two-pronged approach that we divide into curricular resources and educator trainings. So the resources that we create range anywhere from free downloadable lessons or kind of one-offs or around a specific theme to full science units that come with everything that you need to fully explore the subject material. So an example would be our owl pellet kit. Just a side note, we do currently have a free download relating to that. If you're interested in downloading a bone chart, you can download that for free. It's really useful to have if you're doing owl pellet dissections with your students. It allows you to explore things in a deeper way. And so we know that there's a lot of interest out there right now in getting kids outside and exploring their local habitats and connecting to birds. And so when educators are branching out into this new way of connecting kids to science and nature, we often hear that they're looking for support. So we really do try to provide that support through a variety of educator training opportunities. We have in-person opportunities like our educator retreat, which is so popular. We're doing it twice this summer at the lab, so we do hope you will come join us for that. We also are at workshops all the time doing shorter training experiences, as well as we have online courses that are self-paced and you can get continuing education units for, as well as this webinar series that you're taking part in tonight. So if you are looking for support in other ways, please feel free to contact us and we can share more about our suite of professional development. So tonight we are going to be talking about our Feathered Friends curriculum, which is a really awesome way to connect elementary age students to nature through feeding birds. And it makes a really awesome complement to putting a feeder out. It's kind of monthly touch-ins with birds, so everything is themed around what's going on in birds' lives at that time of year. Now I want to jump into the idea of citizen science. It was in the lab's mission, it's in our K-12 team's mission, and I'll be mentioning it several times further on tonight as we continue. So I want to take a moment in the chat window, if you could let me know what you think of when you hear citizen science. Some keywords, a definition, maybe projects that you've participated in. So I'm seeing a couple projects, iNaturalist and eBird, some definitions, non-scientists contributing to science research. So Adele saying lots of eyes and ears all over, providing information to professional scientists. Julie's mentioning the Master Naturalist programs. Shauna is saying, or Shana, sorry, non-professionals gathering data to be used by scientists. Everyday people helping scientists. It's awesome. You guys are on top of it. I love seeing the range of projects that you mentioned, and you hit on some of the really key parts of citizen science here. It really is everyday people, folks like you and me who aren't professional scientists, contributing their observations to databases that scientists can then use to answer real-world questions. Oh, and then Adele was flagging that she can't see all of these answers, and that's because some of you are still sending just to all panelists. So if you could take a moment to switch to all panelists and attendees, that would be awesome. So like this image implies, we really do view citizen science as putting the puzzle pieces of our world together, helping us see the larger picture. And if you've ever done a webinar with me before, you've probably seen this image because I love it. It's to me a really wonderful image that depicts what citizen science is and the power of citizen science. So each point of light that you see on this map is a submission to the eBird database. There's no underlying continental map here. The fact that you can see the shape of our world means that there's that many people out there who care about birds and who are submitting their sightings to the eBird Citizen Science Project. And what that looks like by the numbers is crazy impressive. We've had more than 500 million observations submitted to the eBird database. We're well over that now, which is pretty wild. And that is, when I look at this picture, I like to think about how could a professional scientist or a group of professional scientists recreate this database in their lifetime? And they just couldn't. It's impossible. So this partnership between regular folks like you and me and professional scientists is what makes these huge data sets possible. It really is people-powered science. And in this case, we're talking about observations of the natural world. And for eBird in specific, we're talking about observations of birds. So really, we do view this as a partnership where the professional scientists are getting something out of this. They're getting data that helps them answer real-world questions. And then we, as citizens, are having these questions examined and answered in meaningful ways. And these are questions about the health of our environment and the conservation of species that we care about. So it really is a partnership that goes both ways. And if birds aren't your thing, which I don't know why they wouldn't be, but I am pretty biased, but if they aren't, or if they aren't your students' thing, that's okay. There's citizen science projects out there for you. If you're interested in insects, if you're interested in plants, or stars, or clouds, there are citizen science projects out there that you can participate in. Now, there are currently 6 citizen science projects through the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and most of them follow kind of these basic protocols where you're identifying and observing birds, collecting the data based on those observations, entering that data online, and retrieving and viewing it. And that's something that's really special about the lab's citizen science projects, is the ability to retrieve and view data online. And so we're going to be talking about a couple of these citizen science projects today. We'll be talking about Bird and Project Feeder Watch, but there are also awesome citizen science projects out there that you can participate in through the lab. And I do want to give a shout out to some stuff that's going on in the chat window in case you haven't seen it. SciStarter was brought up. SciStarter.org is an awesome site that will help you find citizen science projects by topic or by region. So you can definitely check that out. Highly recommend it. So let's get back to feeding birds. And I want to throw this back to you. Why feed birds? Why is it interesting? Why is it important? Why are you interested in as an educator? Why feed birds? Attracts wildlife for students to observe, to better observe them. Observation, yeah, so feeding birds brings the birds to you, so you have the opportunity to watch them. Amanda's saying you can supplement bird feeding with native plants to provide food. That's awesome. Adele is saying that feeding birds is a way to connect kids to birds. They get to see their behaviors, their actions that result in birds visiting. That's really cool. Yeah, providing food and fuel for birds. A chance to research and identify birds. Absolutely. So I like that we're putting a lot of things into this chat window that reflect benefits for the birds as well as benefits for ourselves as educators and interested wildlife enthusiasts. So yeah, definitely from the perspective of this woodpecker, having a supplemental food source can make things a little easier for her, help her survive winter, help her gear up and for the arduous task of raising young. So having a supplemental food source is really beneficial to birds like this hairy woodpecker. And especially during those hard winter months, where if you live in a place like Ithaca, you might have seen a scene like this before, though disclaimer, this particular picture is from Europe. So yeah, when it's snowing and there are layers of ice on the ground, it can be difficult for birds to access food. So having feeding stations can provide them that little extra boost of calories they need to survive cold weather. So these supplemental food stations can help feeder birds survive challenging conditions. And as you guys are saying, feeders bring the birds to us. So as educators, that's awesome. If we are able to bring the birds very close to us, maybe we don't have to invest in binoculars for the class if we can bring them close enough. But it also provides that kind of intimate connection that y'all were talking about and the opportunity for kids to see, as Adele said, that their actions result in birds visiting. So they can have kind of this cause and effect relationship with their local birds. And it builds that sense of place and that connection to nature. And as educators, feeding birds, especially when you combine it with citizen science, helps us meet a lot of our educational goals. So it helps us, especially when combined with citizen science, meet NGSS standards. It helps us provide some exciting real-world connections for our kids, which is really motivating as an awesome way to get them to learn. It can be a fairly low-cost activity. You can do it year-round. You know that what you're doing helps birds, and it's amazing that spark of curiosity that you see the first time kids get to watch birds up close. So really, you're providing this opportunity for kids to learn in a hands-on, authentic way that connects them to their local environment. So I want to draw you back again to our Feathered Friends curriculum. Lindsay's going to place a link in the chat window for you that will lead you to where you can download these lessons for free. So the good news is that if by participating in this webinar, you actually also have a link to the opportunity to order a window bird feeder for free from our sponsors at Pennington. So you'll have to pay $6 shipping, but you will be able to get that feeder, and you can start with it right on your window for your classroom. Kathy's asking, is this opportunity only available for schools? So we can only ship the feeder to non-residential addresses. That is the hook, or the catch, I should say, and they need to be in the United States. So non-residential addresses in the United States. And Lindsay just put the link to that feeder for you there. Kathy, if you have an organization address that you're associated with, that would work. Otherwise, feel free to email us and we can maybe work something out. So again, as I mentioned, these are free lessons, elementary age, monthly check-in with birds. But a lot of times when I start talking about these lessons and I start talking about birds, we get feedback from educators saying, okay, this all sounds wonderful, but I don't have birds in my schoolyard. At which point I say, well, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you're suffering from a condition that we all suffer from at one point or other in our lives. That's called bird blindness. It's totally curable because once you start looking for birds around you, you will see them absolutely everywhere. So once you open your eyes, the bird blindness goes away and you will see more birds than you ever thought you would. And you'll find that this is really true for your students too. They'll come back to you after you start a unit like this being like, oh my gosh, I saw these birds in my yard. Oh my gosh, I saw these birds flying by on the bus. And it's a really eye-opening experience. And what's so fun is we get to learn along with our kids when we do an awesome experience like these. So let's start diving into the logistics of feeding birds, because it can be a little bit confusing when you first start, and there are some things that will affect the type of birds that you get to view. And so we're looking at here an array of different feeder types, and type of feeder is going to affect the type of birds that you get to visit. So we see here in the middle a blue jay eating on what I might term a platform feeder, so kind of like an open space. And there are some birds that will only eat on the ground, or these platform feeders that are more open. On the left-hand side at the top, we see what's called a tube feeder, and these tube feeders can hold certain types of seed like Niger, which are much smaller, or if the hole is larger, it can hold kind of the mixed seed, more classic bird seed, and things like finches and chickadees, cardinals, things like that will like these types of feeders. Below that, we see a really specialized feeder, a hummingbird feeder. This feeder is designed to feed sugar water to hummingbirds, though you might have a couple Orioles come and check it out. And so very specialized, requires a lot of care and maintenance to make sure that the feed does, or excuse me, the sugar water doesn't grow mold. So that might be something that you would want to try after you've gotten maybe a rotation of care nailed down for your feeder garden. On the right-hand side, we see a woodpecker on what's called a suet cage. Suet is a very specialized type of feeder. Suet cages really attract those birds that prefer this food, so really designed for woodpeckers and nuthatches. You'll get chickadees and titmice come, see Carolina wrens on them. And then all the way on the right, we see a hopper feeder. And this feeder is kind of a more common, closer to a platform feeder. You'll get a lot of your larger birds hanging out on that. And so another thing that's going to help determine what types of birds visit your feeder is the type of food that you feed. And so you can see some of those feeders here in action and get an idea for some of the variety of different foods that you can feed birds. And we have some really great resources to help you choose the right type of seed for you and the birds in your area. Lindsay just shared the Common Feeder Birds Interactive from Project Feeder Watch in the window, and that's where a lot of these screenshots are going to be coming from in the next couple slides. So you can see that in this chart up here, there are different kinds of, there are different kinds of seeds listed. And there are check marks for the types of birds that will eat it. So sunflower seed, like this, I think that looks like safflower. Sunflower seed, so the black oil sunflower, really typical bird seed, is kind of like the magic seed. If you can only do one seed, that's the one that I recommend. It attracts the most variety of birds. And then you'll see that something else like Niger, which I mentioned earlier, is often fed in 2 feeders. That really only attracts finches. So choosing the seed that you're going to go for is going to affect the type of birds that you have. You'll often see seed blends. So you might see something with sunflower and millet or milo at the store. So this will help you figure out what kind of seeds you want to go for. So this food and feeder preferences of common birds is that interactive that Lindsay shared. This is a really great way to start digging into what birds are in your area, might come to feeders, and what kind of food is going to work for them. So you can select your region in this interactive and then select the food type and see what birds are going to come there to that sort of setup. And you can even get as specific as what type of feeder you're going to use. Right now I have all feeders and all regions selected, and this just goes to show you the difference between black oil sunflower and milo and the amount of birds that it attracts. So if you're worried about the expense of buying feeders, there are lots of options for feeders that you can make. You can see the bottle feeder here. It's a classic one for recycling plastic bottles and making them into feeders that your kids can use. The instructions for this are included in the Feathered Friends handout that I mentioned, as well as the classic pine cone feeder made with peanut butter or vegetable shortening and bird seed. There's also a recipe for seed cookies in the Feathered Friends download as well. So there's lots of options if you don't have the ability to purchase feeders, or if you're looking for more ways to get kids involved in feeding birds and you're looking for something more hands-on. But as I mentioned, you will be able to order a feeder for $6 shipping, and one that sticks right close to your window. Now, we often have people who share with us some concerns that they have about putting a feeder on the window, and that's a really great concern to have because window strikes are very dangerous for birds. But I have some good news if you're worried about window strikes and your window bird feeder. So there was a study that looked into feeder placement and the distance from windows and was looking at the safest collision zones and the deadliest collision zones. And you can see that from 1 meter, about 3 feet, to about 15 feet is the safest zone, with the deadliest zone happening from about 15 to 30 feet, which is where most people end up placing their feeders. So your window bird feeder is actually a really safe version of a feeder for birds to use. And part of that is because most birds collide with windows when they're startled away from feeders. They're trying to escape a predator or something like that. They get a little disoriented and they can hit windows, mistaking the reflection for more habitat. But if they're right up against the window, that reflection isn't as much of an issue, and if they do hit it, they haven't built up as much momentum to hurt themselves. So you're actually looking at a pretty safe zone. Another thing that also gets brought up often when we talk about feeding birds are squirrels. They are the nemesis of bird feeders everywhere. I'm sure Lindsay would attest to that as well. They have the uncanny ability to eat you out of house and home when you're feeding birds. So there are some strategies that you can take to reduce the impacts of squirrels on your bird feeders. We highly recommend using baffles. It's a way to predator-proof or squirrel-proof your feeders. And so the baffle on the left here is for if you hang your feeders on a pole system. This will prevent squirrels from climbing up. The baffle on the right prevents them from climbing down if you hang it from something. The challenge is putting your feeders about 10 feet from something that they can jump off of to get onto it, because they can jump about 10 feet in any direction. Kathy, you're saying your issue is feral cats. Yeah, that is a challenge. If you have feral cats who have figured out you have a feeder, we recommend taking your feeders down, at least for a couple weeks, and hopefully the cat will move on, but feral cats are a real challenge. Also providing lots of cover places for birds to escape to. But yeah, if a feral cat figures you out, you might be out of luck for a while. But sometimes you're out of luck with the squirrels too. Squirrels are very good at getting past baffles. So you might just have to do some trial and error with feeder placement. If you're looking for advice on how to deal with squirrels at your feeding stations, Lindsay just shared the link to this bird note, which has lots of useful advice in it. Another question we often get asked is, when should you feed birds? And so, as I mentioned before, winter is a great time to feed birds, providing that supplemental food when weather conditions are challenging. But it really does turn out that feeding birds can have benefits at any time of year. So during the summer months, you're supporting birds as they're raising young. And during the spring and fall, you can be supporting birds that are migrating and building up reserves as they get ready to go on their long journeys. We've had some people share concerns about having out feeder stations, encouraging some birds not to migrate. And that's not really an issue. You might see birds into the late fall, but sometimes there are just stragglers. There's lots of studies that show that feeders are treated like supplemental food sources for birds. So a lot of the urge to migrate actually comes from sunlight and day length and all of that stuff. So it's not going to prevent a bird from migrating, having feeders out during migration season. So Adele is mentioning that having a bird feeding station can be challenging because it's difficult to convince groundskeepers that messy, in quotes, trees, bushes, and feeders are worth mowing around. So what's the best way to create a place with cover that birds can find? That is a real challenge working with your groundskeepers. I don't know if anybody in the chat window has some experience that they can share or some methods they've used. I wonder if it's possible to actually turn a dedicated space into a little feeder garden. I've seen people do raised feeder beds, and that way you could have a really designated space for some bushes and native plants, and the raised bed is a little bit easier to trim around sometimes than other sorts of structures, or just trimming around one tree and one bush.
Hey, Kelly.
Yeah.
I'm going to chime in here real quick. Hi, Adele.
Please do.
So this is something that we have worked with a lot of educators on when it comes to when we were supporting a lot of school gardens. And one of the struggles that they had was the groundkeeper. And so we would first work with them to identify why is it the groundkeepers are resisting. Could it be the mess that the seeds are left? Could it be they just don't, like you said, want to mow around the areas? Could it be the true messy look and they prefer a much more manicured look? So I would recommend to start with figuring out what is their concerns with the issues, and then if you want, first just start with Are they willing to put up the window bird feeders? Because that's something where it's not providing cover right away. Their shelter is more along the lines of being near the building, and then see if they're okay with the window bird feeders. If they start to see students' interest and eagerness, that may also be a nice convincing way to get the groundskeepers on board, or at least get administrators on board who could have a little more sway of groundskeepers. That's one bit of success we have in 1 or 2 schools in the past. So a little recommendation there.
Thank you, Lindsay. So another issue, in addition to working with your school to find the right location and right way to run a feeding station, is sometimes you get your feeders up and no birds come. Can anybody spot the reason why there might be no birds at this particular feeder? Well, no feeder birds. Adele spots the kestrel up at the right-hand corner. And then on the lower left, we've got another bird of prey. So yeah, we've got, I want to say Cooper's hawk. So we've got a couple birds of prey that are known to feed on feeder birds hanging out here. And much like with the feral cats, if that happens, we recommend that you take down your feeders until those birds of prey move on. And then you can put them back out and enjoy your feeder birds again. But yeah, birds of prey will quickly learn that this is a feeding station in more than one way. So you might want to keep an eye out for that. And as I mentioned, this is actually a pretty good setup here because it has a lot of cover. So if you can provide cover for birds, that's a great way to provide them a safe place to escape to. So we've had some folks who have tried to incorporate feeder gardens into their schools. This is a class from Hilltop of 3rd graders, and their educator came to our retreat, picked up some bird feeders, went back to the classroom, put them out, and the whole 3rd grade class was so excited to start getting birds coming to their feeder. But after a couple weeks, no birds were coming, and it can take a little while for birds to find a feeder, but this seemed excessive, so they decided that they needed to do some investigating. So they researched their local birds, they drew pictures, they wrote up facts, they got to know their local birds really well. What were their habitat needs? What sort of things did they eat? They went out and did bird walks and found what kind of birds were in their area so they could cater the seed and feeder choices to them and understand what they liked to eat. And then they designed plans for their feeder garden. So we can see a lot of really great components of habitat here. You see water, lots of places for cover, a large space, some different levels of canopy, which is awesome. And of course, all sorts of different kinds of feeders. So this is a really awesome way to get kids involved and excited about creating a feeder garden and helping to choose what those would look like. And then they set to work. They went out and they used lasagna gardening techniques to build up the soil in their window boxes. They put in raised beds and built up the soil there as well. And everybody was involved in this process. And then before you know it, they had this beautiful little feeder garden, which I love because it looks so much like their plans. There's the bird bath right there. There's a hummingbird feeder. There's the 2 feeders that we saw earlier and nice plants getting ready to grow in around them. And the good news is after all of this work, the birds started to come. So creating the habitat, creating the cover, enriching it, as Amanda mentioned earlier, with native plants really brought in the birds to them. So they had a really successful habitat improvement project that brought the birds in. And if you do decide to feed birds, I really do encourage you to try and involve your students in citizen science as well, because the observations that they make at their feeders really do matter. So there are a couple ways that you can incorporate citizen science with feeding birds. One of them is the Great Backyard Bird Count. This takes place for 4 days in February every year, this year from February 14th to the 17th. And all you have to do is watch birds for at least 15 minutes during 2 consecutive days as part of this count. And you've participated in citizen science, so it can be a really great way to get involved in citizen science and incorporate that into your programming. Another project which we've mentioned before is Project Feeder Watch, and this is a project that takes place across North America and is a really awesome way to keep track of bird populations during the winter. So it takes place from November to April and involves thousands of people across the country in these observations. It also has some really interesting protocols that go with it about how you count birds, so you can teach your students about scientific protocols and how those help standardize data. So it does cost $18 to participate for non-members, $15 for members, and it comes with this awesome poster of common feeder birds. There's Eastern on the front, Western on the back, so wherever you are, it can work for you. And this awesome Feeder Watch handbook and instructions, which goes over those scientific protocols that I mentioned. So with these supplies and the support of your small donation the small fee to participate in this program, you'll get everything that you need to be successful. And then this is actually a self-funded program, so this helps, your fees help run this program every year, year after year. And this is really important because data from Project Feeder Watch has been used to detect changes in populations of common feeder birds. So the evening grosbeak, this beautiful bird pictured here on the left, is one that Project Feeder Watch data was the first to detect population declines in. And so you can see in these graphs on the right, populations for the North Atlantic region showing some pretty large declines, as well as declines in the Great Lakes and New England region. And so we're looking at blue is average number of birds seen at one time, and red is the percentage of feeders visited. So we're seeing declines in this species. And this data was published in a scientific journal. So this is data that other scientists now have access to and can use to help make conservation decisions related to these birds that we're seeing declines in. So this data is really important way to track trends that we might not see otherwise. Another project that we have is eBird. eBird is, I mentioned earlier with that beautiful picture of the world. eBird is a great project that takes place year-round, and eBird's motto is every bird counts. So we want you to report your common sightings. We want you to report your rare sightings. Every time that you see birds, you can report them to eBird. So a number of years ago, as eBird was approaching its 100th millionth observation, everybody here at the lab was really excited for that milestone. But we all thought that the person submitting the 100th millionth observation was going to be some Uber birder somewhere. Probably one of the lab folks who submits 3 checklists a day, one while they're driving to work, one while they're on lunch, one while they're doing dishes in the evening. But when that 100th millionth observation rolled in, it was by 12-year-old Leron, and it was of an American robin. So it was a great moment for us in the education department because it really brought home the fact that kids participating in citizen science matter, that the observations of even the most common birds really matter. And so eBird is a project that you can do while watching feeders. It's a project that you can do while you're taking walks around your school. So it's a really flexible project in that way. What's also great about eBird is that it has the opportunity for you to mine the data. So all of those more than 500,000 observations are in that database and you have access to them. So if you were to go to the eBird website and go to the Explore tab, you could look through graphs related to the birds that you see in your area. And so here I pulled out some information for the northern cardinal and the ruby-throated hummingbird. And I was curious about how they're seen by eBirders in Missouri. So you can see on the left that the y-axis is frequency, so the frequency that they're reported on checklists, and then the x-axis is date, running from January to December. And so we can see that the cardinal is pretty steady between 40 and 60% throughout the year, whereas the ruby-throated hummingbird really shows a very different pattern. And so what do you think the pattern that we're seeing about the ruby-throated hummingbird indicates about it? What can we infer about its life from what we're seeing here? It migrates, absolutely. We're not seeing it present from January to March or late-ish October to December. So it's just not here in the winter. So we can infer that it migrates from that. But then something that I think is really cool here is you're seeing these dips in June and into July, both in the northern cardinal, which is a resident species, and in the migratory ruby-throated hummingbird. So why do you think we're seeing that dip in both of these birds? Adele's wondering about time on nest. Oh, I like this. We're thinking about birders and their access. And are they out as much during these time? Are they traveling? Interesting thoughts. We're looking at this as percentage of sightings on lists. So even if the list number was down low, the percentage might stay the same. I liked Adele's idea. She started wondering about nest. Shayna's also wondering about raising young. Yeah, so if we look at this graph, we see it's right in that prime breeding season. And so this dip is probably because birds get super secretive when they're nesting. They don't want you to know where their nest is. They don't want to be followed. They don't want to be seen. They get sneaky. So they're a little bit harder to detect during that time. So we don't have as many records of them during that time. So I think that these graphs and these data are awesome because they provide the opportunity to really look at it, think about how the data reflects a bird's life cycle, make some inferences about it. I liked the questions that you were asking about access from birders. Are there just less birders out there? It sparks awesome questions like that too. So to draw your attention back to Feathered Friends, I just wanted to give you a little bit more of an idea what these lessons are like. So there again is one for months September through June, and each one is designed to meet different standards. So we do meet NGSS standards. There are lots of themes that these lessons cover, including bird diversity, habitat, flight and migration, conservation, and these citizen science projects we've been talking about. And they all start with a big idea, so you know what you're getting into, and the idea that the lesson meets, as well as learning objectives and those standards that I mentioned. Each month also introduces you to new birds or new groups of birds so that you kind of build up your knowledge of birds over time. And another thing that you can do to complement feeding birds, to complement using the Feathered Friends lessons, is engaging your students in inquiry. So feeding birds and looking at citizen science data, as we've already seen here, inspires lots of really cool questions and ideas. So we can capture those questions so we can turn them into inquiry projects. And our free download Investigating Evidence is a curriculum that will guide you through that. Lindsay's going to share the link to Investigating Evidence in the chat window for you in a moment. And I just want to share with you an inquiry project that's come out of this suite of resources. So Amy is a fourth grader who noticed that when her neighbor's cat was out in the yard, not as many birds were visiting her bird feeder. Now, she couldn't tether her neighbor's cat to the tree, so she decided to do the next best thing and use a fake cat and test, will a fake cat scare away birds? And so she noticed that without the cat present, birds ate 3.5 cups of seed. But with the cat present, birds only ate half a cup of seed. So she saw a pretty big difference. And she reported that difference to us in a Bird Sleuth Investigator magazine, where she reported her results as the cat being a good guard. But she thought over time the birds would get used to the fact that the cat was there and learn that it was fake. So this is what you want to see in science, right? Your research opening up doors to new questions. And so she made this prediction that, and this is the graph she created, that over time, the birds would get used to the fake cat and would come back to eventually eating nearly as much seed as they were before. So that's really the awesome type of questions that we are hoping to inspire. Here's another great project that we've seen before, the effect of snow depth on bird counts. And these are kindergarten and first graders. And they were able to measure the depth of snow. So they were learning content that they needed to be learning, how to measure things. And then they used that to see how it affected the average number of birds at their feeder. So what's great about these two studies is you don't have to be able to identify the birds to do either of these. You just are looking at either the amount of seed, or in the case of this study, just the average number of birds. So there are ways, even if your students aren't bird ID experts, that you can turn feeding birds into opportunities to explore science in deeper ways. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk to you a little bit about the paper that just came out today in Science, co-authored by some folks here at the lab. And this paper looked at the total number of birds across 529 species in the United States and Canada, and looked at the difference in their populations between 1970 and now, using Christmas bird count data and others, and bird atlas projects and citizen science data like that. And they found that since 1970, 2.9 billion birds have been lost from the breeding bird population in North America. So that is a huge number. That is more than 28% of birds lost in just 50 years in the span of a human lifetime. What that looks like is more than 1 in 4 birds gone since 1970. And for some birds that you might know, we're looking at 3 in 4 meadowlarks lost since 1970. So the grasslands have been hit very hard with the 53% population loss. We're seeing these losses across habitats, and from rare birds to very common birds, actually common birds being hit the hardest. And remember our evening grosbeak that we have feeder watch data for? Here's where we stand now with evening grosbeaks. 9 in 10 evening grosbeaks have been lost since 1970. So that's a 33% loss for birds in the boreal forest since 1970. And so these numbers look pretty grim, and the birds and their populations are telling us something about our habitats and the health of our environments. And it's something that we need to listen to. But there's really good news as well contained in this report. There's reason to hope. We're seeing increases in populations like raptors, in waterfowl, and in woodpeckers. And that's because for all of these groups of birds, we have made concerted efforts towards conservation. We have invested time, we have invested money, we have invested in their habitats. So if we decide to take action, and when we decide to take action, we make things better. So there is a lot of reason to hope that through dedicated action, we can have really positive effects on these birds that we're seeing. And so the reason that citizen science data is so important is because it allows us to see these trends, these really scary, damaging trends, before they become irreversible. So I don't think we're at the irreversible stage for any of these bird groups yet. There's still time to take action and make things better. And so if you are interested in learning more about how to make things better for birds, there are 7 simple actions that you can take. And you can learn more about that on the 3billionbirds.org website, which Lindsay has shared in the chat window. And so we've actually already talked about 3 of these actions. We talked about window strikes tonight. We talked about how when you're feeding birds, you can reduce the chance of fatal window strikes. So if you do decide to feed birds, keep in mind that graphic I showed you that shows between your window distance and 15 feet out from it is the safest zone to place a feeder. We've talked about planting natives. Amanda brought up planting natives as a way to supplement food. So if you think about all of the lawns and schoolyards that are just monocultured grass, there's an opportunity to create habitat for birds there and other insects and animals that use these native plants. So if you do decide to feed birds, consider supplementing with native plants and creating some of that cover that you need to be successful when feeding birds by using native plants. The third action that we talked about is the one that I mentioned earlier, citizen science. Share what you see. Get your kids involved in citizen science. Get them used to sharing their observations. It's really a wonderful tool for you as an educator to build their confidence, to build their view of themselves as scientists, and to help them contribute to understanding their world and finding solutions that matter. So again, if you choose to feed birds, which I really hope you will, you have opportunities to help birds in a number of ways. And now is the time. Birds need our help now. So thank you for all that you do to involve your kids in getting outside and watching birds, because it's going to matter. And now is a critical time to get kids interested in these things and harness their power of curiosity and excitement to invigorate us to take action. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat window. Both Lindsay and I are ready to answer. But if at any time you have questions over the next few weeks, or you're thinking about creating a garden and you would love some advice, please feel free to contact us on social media or through our email at k12lab@cornell.edu. We're always really excited to hear from you. I do want to take a moment really quickly to talk to you about a couple options for receiving professional development acknowledgement for these webinars. If you are interested in receiving an informal completion letter from us for 1 contact hour, please feel free to email us at the website, or excuse me, at the email listed on this slide, and we will be happy to send you a completion letter. If you need CEUs or continuing education units, you can get those from us. There is a fee associated with it because there is a fee for us to get those units from Cornell. You can purchase that from our store, and there are 3 options for acquiring this credit. You can attend all 10 webinars that we give throughout the year and review them. You can attend 5 webinars that we give throughout the year, review them, and create an implementation plan, where you can attend 1 webinar, review it, create an implementation plan, and then implement that plan and write a report on that for a continuing education unit from Cornell. So that option is available on our website through our store, and Lindsay just shared all of that in the chat window for you. So I'm going to go ahead and mute myself for a second, but we're still here. If you have questions, please ask away.